Now, drop Caitlyn Clark into that powder keg. She wasn't just another rookie, she was the rookie. The name driving ticket sales, the face on posters, the engine behind TV ratings. Before even completing a full season, she had become the WNBA's most valuable marketing asset. And unlike many of her peers, she had the platform and cultural reach to make her words impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why her comment mattered. Because in this moment, when officiating was already the league's Achilles heel, Clark made her move. She wasn't just another frustrated player venting about refs, she was the one person the WNBA could not afford to dismiss. When she said, "I wouldn't miss a call," it wasn't just another soundbite, it was the voice of the league's financial backbone saying out loud what everyone else had been whispering. This is why the timing was catastrophic for WNBA leadership. Clark didn't create the officiating crisis, but with one sentence, she made it impossible for the league to sweep under the rug. She turned a simmering controversy into a national conversation about credibility, fairness, and the balance of power in women's basketball. And once she said it, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Every message lives or dies based on where it's delivered. And Caitlyn Clark knew exactly what she was doing when she chose Sue Bird's podcast as her stage. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't casual. It was strategy at its finest. Because in today's media landscape, the platform is just as important as the words themselves. And Clark picked the one podium that guaranteed her statement would echo far beyond the hardwood. Sue Bird isn't just a retired player. She's a Hall of Famer, a four-time champion, a global ambassador for women's sports. Her voice carries credibility with athletes, coaches, fans, and the media alike. Her podcast isn't some fringe YouTube interview lost in the algorithm. It's the gold standard for WNBA player conversations. A space that doesn't just report stories, it creates them. Entertainment outlets cover Bird's episodes, social justice groups analyze them, mainstream sports networks replay them. When a player speaks on Bird's show, it travels. Period. And Caitlyn Clark knew this better than anyone. If she had dropped her now famous line, "I wouldn't miss a call," in a routine post-practice scrum, it might have been buried under local coverage and quickly forgotten. But on Bird's platform, those words were destined to become headlines. It wasn't just a podcast appearance. It was a calculated press conference disguised as casual conversation. Clark essentially stood on the most respected stage in women's basketball and fired her critique with a legend sitting across from her, nodding and understanding. That legitimized her words instantly. The delivery also mattered. Clark didn't sound angry or bitter. She was calm, almost playful, as if she knew the weight her sentence would carry. And Sue Bird's reaction sealed it. The smile, the head tilt, the subtle acknowledgement that history had just been made. It was like watching a relay baton being passed from one generation to the next. Bird, the veteran, signaling to the audience, "Pay attention. This moment matters." The result? Immediate and unstoppable virality. Fans clipped the moment, shared it, captioned it, and made it trend national. Within hours, Clark's statement wasn't just a WNBA headline, it was a cultural talking point. Hashtags like "Clark was right" gained traction, and suddenly her 6 words were being debated on sports, talk shows, and in living rooms across America. That kind of reach doesn't happen without the right platform. This is the real power of Clark's decision. She didn't just speak her truth, she elevated it into the mainstream through a carefully chosen medium. She understood that in today's digital age, words alone aren't enough. You need the right stage, the right host, and the right cultural context to make them resonate. And in Sue Bird's podcast, she found the perfect storm. The league knows it, too. Because once a comment gains legitimacy on a platform like that, it can't be brushed aside as player frustration. It becomes part of the record, part of the history. And for the WNBA, part of a growing problem they can't ignore. When Caitlyn Clark dropped her now legendary line, "I wouldn't miss a call," the reaction wasn't a slow build, it was instant. Within minutes of the clip airing, fans had clipped it, captioned it, and blasted it across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit. It wasn't just trending locally or regionally, it was trending nationally. That's the kind of reaction you'd expect from a championship-winning shot, not a single offhand comment about officiating. But that's the level of weight Clark's words carry. The hashtag #ClarkWasRight began spreading like wildfire. Fans started tagging her in videos of questionable calls from games she wasn't even playing in. It was as if Clark had been deputized by the entire WNBA fanbase as the league's unofficial quality control officer. If there was a bad whistle anywhere in the league, Clark's name was attached to it. Every missed call became another example that validated her critique. The fans didn't just agree with her, they made her the symbol of their frustration. And then the media pounced. Sports talk shows replayed the clip on loop, debating whether Clark had gone too far or whether she was simply saying what everyone already knew. Analysts dug up statistics on foul discrepancies. Columnists wrote about the league's officiating crisis with Clark's comment as the headline. What might have been dismissed as a minor gripe from another player became front-page news because it came from her. Her star power didn't just amplify the issue, it forced the conversation onto the national stage. Behind the scenes, the eruption was even louder. Insiders reported that some league executives were furious, wanting to handle the matter quietly by pulling Clark aside and reminding her that certain criticisms are supposed to stay in-house. But others in leadership circles knew better. They recognized the disaster that would come from trying to muzzle her. Clark wasn't just another athlete, they couldn't risk making her a martyr in the eyes of millions of fans. Silencing the league's most marketable star would have backfired spectacularly. And then there were the referees. Word leaked that some officials felt personally attacked, seeing her words as a direct insult to their professionalism. Some were angry, others were defensive. But here's the telling part quietly. A few admitted she wasn't wrong. Data already showed glaring inconsistencies in foul calls, and insiders knew Clark had been watching closely from the sidelines. She wasn't speculating. She was shining a spotlight on a problem everyone had been whispering about. The eruption proved one undeniable truth. Caitlyn Clark's voice is bigger than the league itself. When she speaks, fans rally, media amplifies, and executives scramble. Her single sentence didn't just expose a crack in the WNBA's foundation, it turned it into a nationwide earthquake. And the aftershocks are still being felt. Here's where the story takes a turn that should terrify every league executive. The WNBA's official response to Caitlyn Clark's comment was absolute silence. No press release, no clarification, no defense of the referees, no acknowledgement of Clark's critique, nothing. And in the world of public relations, silence is never neutral. Silence is an answer. And in this case, it was the loudest, most damning answer of all. From a fan's perspective, the silence looked like surrender. If the league truly believed Clark was out of line, they would have pushed back. If they wanted to show confidence in their officiating crews, they would have issued a statement of support. Instead, they let Clark's words hang in the air, unchallenged, and when you don't counter a narrative, you cede control of it. That's exactly what happened. Clark's 6 words became the defining storyline because the league chose not to write a competing one. Behind closed doors, though, silence didn't mean calm. According to insiders, the mood in league offices during those first 48 hours was nothing short of fractured. Some executives demanded immediate action, arguing that Clark needed to be reminded of her place. They believed letting her go unchecked would embolden other players to air grievances publicly, weakening the league's authority. Others, however, warned that trying to muzzle her would be catastrophic. Clark wasn't just a star, she was the star, the player filling arenas and driving ratings. Punishing her, or even appearing to silence her, risked creating a martyr figure the league couldn't control. The referees' union added another layer of tension. Many officials felt personally disrespected by Clark's words, believing she had crossed a professional line. Some even wanted public backing from the league as a show of solidarity. But here's the irony. Within their own ranks, some refs quietly admitted Clark had a point. Data supported her observations, and players had been voicing similar frustrations all season. The league's silence left the referees hanging, with no public defense and no resolution to the simmering tension. When a rookie phenom is supposed to be carrying the future of an entire league, injuries don't just sideline a player, they destabilize the business model of the sport itself. Caitlyn Clark, the WNBA's brightest young star, has already been through that brutal cycle. Sit out, heal, come back, shine, get hurt again. It's not just her body that has been tested, it's her patience, her mental resilience, and her ability to project strength while living through uncertainty. From the outside, fans only see the highlight reels and box scores. But Clark has been brutally honest about the deeper struggle, the stop-and-go grind of dealing with injuries that don't follow a predictable recovery timeline. This isn't a simple 6-week ankle sprain with a clear return date circled on the calendar. These are nagging, unpredictable setbacks where one good game can be followed by days of pain. She admitted she doesn't know how her body will feel after each performance, a constant emotional tightrope that demands patience most athletes don't have time for. What separates Clark, however, is the perspective she's shown through this chaos. She hasn't just framed her comeback as a physical battle, but as a lesson in giving herself grace. In her own words, she's learning patience, discipline, and how to be the best version of herself despite the unpredictability. That's not the language of someone defeated, it's the language of someone preparing for longevity, not just short-term glory. But here's the hidden angle the league doesn't want to admit. Every time Clark goes down, the WNBA's ratings and ticket sales wobble. Her presence isn't just about her numbers on the court, it's about the financial heartbeat of a league desperate to break into the mainstream. And when that heartbeat is tied to a player battling injury uncertainty, the pressure on both her and the league multiplies. Clark knows this, and it's why her battle with injuries matters far beyond her personal health. It's the quiet, uncomfortable truth the WNBA is forced to reckon with. One player's physical well-being has become a litmus test for the entire league's stability. Let's be blunt. Caitlyn Clark didn't just criticize officiating, she detonated a live grenade in the middle of the WNBA's credibility crisis. And she did it with only 6 words: "I wouldn't miss a call." To the casual fan, it might have sounded playful, maybe even harmless. But to anyone paying attention, that sentence was the equivalent of a direct indictment of the league's integrity. The power of those words comes from where they landed. Clark wasn't fresh off a loss, ranting in a locker room with emotions still boiling. She wasn't at a random press scrum where comments vanish into the media void. She was seated across from Sue Bird, one of the most respected legends in basketball history, on a podcast that functions less like an interview chair and more like a pulpit. Every word spoken there carries weight, because Bird's name validates the message before it even hits the airwaves. Clark knew this, and she used it. Her delivery was calm, calculated, almost too casual, like a surgeon making a single incision that changes the entire procedure. She didn't shout, she didn't plead, she didn't hedge. By speaking so directly, she put the league in an impossible position: acknowledge her words and admit to systemic problems, or ignore her and risk looking like they were too afraid to confront their star. Either option was damaging, and that's why her statement hit harder than any post-game rant from any other player could have. The beauty and the danger of Clark's line is its ambiguity. On the surface, it's witty. Beneath it, it's an accusation. Fans interpreted it as confirmation of what they've been screaming online all season: the officiating is broken. Other players saw it as validation that their frustrations weren't just personal gripes, but part of a larger pattern. And officials? Many felt it as a direct shot at their professionalism. In less than 10 seconds, Clark had managed to widen the cracks already forming between players, referees, and league executives. This is why those 6 words can't be dismissed as a throwaway. They weren't. They were a challenge, a dare, a public acknowledgement that the league's officiating, already in crisis, had lost the trust of its most marketable asset. And when your biggest star questions your foundation, that's not a headline, it's a warning shot that can ripple all the way to boardrooms, broadcast partners, and even, as some speculate, the Department of Justice. Caitlyn Clark didn't just make a comment, she forced the WNBA into a corner, and the league has yet to find its way out. In sports, timing is everything. And Caitlyn Clark's decision to speak out wasn't random, it was a masterclass in strategy. Think about it. She could have lashed out after a bad call in a heated game. She could have vented during a losing streak, when frustration would have been understandable. But she didn't. She waited, she observed, she studied, and only when the moment was perfect did she make her move. At the time of her interview with Sue Bird, Clark was sidelined with injuries. That might sound like a disadvantage, but in reality, it gave her something few players ever have: perspective. While her teammates were grinding through games, Clark was watching from the sidelines, almost like an assistant coach with the freedom to study everything. She wasn't buried in the intensity of live play, she had the vantage point to see officiating patterns unfold across multiple games. Who got the whistles? Who didn't? When the whistle suddenly disappeared, she was piecing together a bigger picture that most players are too busy competing to notice. Behind the scenes, reports suggest Clark was meticulously breaking down film, rewinding plays, and dissecting how fouls were being called or not called. That means, when she finally said, "I wouldn't miss a call," it wasn't born out of vague frustration. It came from evidence, from hours of observation, from a mental file she'd been building game after game. That's not an emotional complaint, that's a calculated statement backed by research. But her timing wasn't just about her own preparation, it was about the league's vulnerability. The WNBA was already in the middle of its biggest officiating credibility crisis in years. Fans were roasting refs online, players were getting fined for speaking out, coaches were being penalized just for voicing what everyone could see. And then the commissioner's tone-deaf remark, "No winning team complains about officiating," poured gasoline on the fire. That was the moment Clark chose to step in. Not too early, not too late, just when the chaos was peaking. And then there's the platform. By going on Sue Bird's podcast, she guaranteed her words would cut through the noise. Bird's show isn't a place where moments die, it's a place where they're born. Entertainment outlets, social justice groups, and mainstream sports media all amplify what happens there. Clark knew that. She picked a stage that would elevate her words beyond basketball and make them part of the larger cultural conversation. This is what makes her statement so dangerous for the league. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment chatter, it was a chess move, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, and perfectly delivered to ensure maximum impact. And the WNBA, caught flat-footed, had no immediate counter. Clark had seized the narrative. To truly understand why Caitlyn Clark's 6 words exploded like a thunderclap, you have to look at the storm she walked into. The WNBA wasn't in a calm or stable moment. It was already teetering on the edge of chaos. Officiating had become the single most controversial storyline of the season. And Clark, the league's golden star, didn't just step into the conversation, she amplified it to a level leadership could no longer control. Let's set the stage. Night after night, fans were flooding social media with clips of questionable fouls. Calls that made no sense. No calls that changed the outcomes of games. Within minutes of final buzzers, Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok were filled with slow-motion breakdowns. Fans dissecting every whistle as if the league were on trial. And here's the kicker. Players weren't staying silent anymore. Multiple stars risked fines to call out officiating publicly. Coaches were hit with penalties just for voicing what every fan could see. The league's credibility, its promise that the game is fair and officiated with integrity, was being torn apart, play by play. Then came the commissioner's infamous comment, "No winning team complains about officiating." To fans, it sounded dismissive, almost mocking. To players, it was worse. It was an insult. The message was clear. If you speak out, you're not just a sore loser, you're delegitimizing your own victories. In other words, shut up and play. That one statement poured gasoline on an already raging fire, deepening the divide between league leadership and the athletes carrying its brand forward. So, the WNBA leadership did what they thought was safest, nothing. But doing nothing didn't stop the storm, it fueled it. Every day the league remained silent. Clark's words gained more traction, talk shows replayed the clip, fans kept posting videos of missed calls, linking them back to her statement. By refusing to speak, the league effectively crowned Caitlyn Clark as the voice of authority on officiating. Here's the truth, executives don't want to admit. Silence wasn't a strategy, it was fear. Fear of their biggest star. Fear of the fans siding with her. Fear of sparking an even bigger backlash if they picked the wrong side. But in trying to avoid that backlash, they created a new problem. They let Clark set the narrative. And once a player controls the narrative, the balance of power between athlete and institution shifts in ways that are almost impossible to reverse. When Caitlyn Clark finally returned to the court after her injury layoff, it wasn't just a player suiting up again, it was a seismic shift in the balance of power between athlete and league. Before her absence, Clark was already the WNBA's crown jewel, the rookie phenom, drawing record-breaking crowds, spiking TV ratings, and moving merchandise like no other player in league history. But her time away, paired with that now infamous statement about officiating, elevated her from star to symbol. When she came back, she wasn't just playing basketball, she was walking onto the hardwood as the voice of the people, and the league felt it instantly. Every arena she stepped into during her comeback tour buzzed differently. Fans weren't just there to see her score, they were there to see what she would say, how she would react, whether she would double down on her quiet but devastating critique. The subtext was always hanging in the air. Would referees dare miss a call in her game after she had put the entire officiating system under the microscope? Suddenly, every whistle in a Caitlyn Clark game carried extra weight. Every call scrutinized more closely by cameras, fans, and analysts. In effect, she had shifted the power dynamic. Referees weren't policing her, she was policing them. But the impact went beyond the court. In sponsorship circles, her return meant every brand attached to the WNBA was now directly tied to her narrative. Companies love a marketable star, but they also love authenticity. Clark had shown she wasn't afraid to speak truth to power, and that authenticity only deepened her connection with fans. Sponsors didn't shy away, they leaned in. Ratings surged, merchandise sales spiked, and media outlets continued to spotlight her. The more the league tried to tiptoe around her, the more the market rewarded her boldness. Internally, this was a nightmare for executives. For decades, the WNBA, like most professional leagues, operated on the idea that no single player was bigger than the game itself. But Clark's return made one fact undeniable. At that moment, she was bigger than the game. Her presence drove attendance, her words drove headlines, her influence reached beyond basketball into cultural discourse. When she played, it felt like an event. When she spoke, it felt like policy. That's not just star power, that's institutional power. Her teammates and even rival players felt it, too. While some may have privately resented her spotlight, many recognized that her voice created room for others to speak up about long-standing grievances. Clark's return emboldened the player community in ways subtle and overt. The league, which once dictated the conversation, now found itself reacting to the tone and narrative set by one 22-year-old rookie. This is the crux of what changed. Before her injury, Clark was the league's poster child. After her return, she was the league's unofficial regulator, an athlete whose presence alone shifted how the WNBA operated, how referees officiated, and how executives scrambled behind the scenes. That's not just a comeback, that's a power takeover. Here's the uncomfortable reality the WNBA can't ignore. Caitlyn Clark's 6 words didn't just expose officiating problems, they exposed the league's fragile image. For years, the WNBA has fought an uphill battle for mainstream respect. It's made undeniable progress. Record-setting TV deals, higher attendance, expanding media coverage. But with growth comes scrutiny, and when your brightest star calls out a systemic weakness on national television, the entire brand takes a hit. To the casual fan, the ones the WNBA desperately needs to convert into loyal viewers, the takeaway wasn't, Caitlyn Clark is frustrated. It was, even Caitlyn Clark thinks the refs are bad. That perception is dangerous. Professional sports thrive on the belief that competition is fair, that the best team wins because of talent and strategy, not because of questionable whistles. When doubt creeps in about officiating, credibility erodes. And credibility is the foundation the WNBA has been trying to build for decades. The league's silence, as we've already covered, amplified this perception. Instead of rushing to demonstrate accountability, perhaps by reviewing officiating data, publicly supporting referee training programs, or announcing reforms, they let the narrative spiral. The image that stuck wasn't of a league in control. It was of a league exposed, with its refereeing shortcomings laid bare by the very player carrying its growth. In brand terms, that's catastrophic. But here's the paradox. While the league's image took a beating, Caitlyn Clark's personal brand skyrocketed. Fans love authenticity, and Clark gave them exactly that. She wasn't playing politics, she wasn't delivering a sanitized, PR-approved soundbite. She was raw, frustrated, and real. For fans, that made her not just relatable, but trustworthy. In a world where athletes often feel overcoached and corporate, Clark stood out as someone unafraid to risk backlash for the truth. Her stock soared while the league's credibility faltered. This creates a troubling dynamic for the WNBA. Their image is now tethered to her voice. If she thrives, they thrive, but only if they're seen as responding to the issues she raises. If they continue to ignore her critiques, they risk alienating fans who've already chosen Clark's honesty over the league's silence. In other words, the league no longer controls its image narrative, Caitlyn Clark does. And that raises the biggest question of all. Can a league survive when its image depends more on one player than on the institution itself? The NBA had Michael Jordan, yes, but the league ensured it always looked like it was the driver of change, not the player. The WNBA, on the other hand, looks like it's chasing after Clark, trying to keep up with her cultural influence rather than leading it. That's not just a PR problem, that's an existential one. And now we arrive at the final, perhaps most consequential question. What will Caitlyn Clark's 6 words mean for the broader legacy of the WNBA? Was it just a passing controversy? Or was it a turning point that future generations will look back on as the moment when the balance of power in women's basketball shifted forever? To answer that, we need to step back and look at the big picture. Clark's comment didn't happen in a vacuum. It came at a time when women's sports are exploding in visibility, when ratings are climbing, and when cultural conversations about fairness, investment, and respect are louder than ever. In that climate, her critique wasn't just about referees, it was about the league's accountability, transparency, and commitment to excellence. She forced fans, media, and even executives to ask hard questions about whether the WNBA is truly ready to operate on the same level of scrutiny and professionalism as the NBA or other major sports leagues. And that's the irony. Her frustration, though damaging in the short term, may end up being the best thing to ever happen to the WNBA in the long term. Because moments of crisis often spark reform. If the league responds to this with real change, improved officiating standards, greater transparency, a willingness to hold itself accountable, then Clark's 6 words will go down as the catalyst that accelerated the league's evolution into a fully mature, globally respected sports institution. But the legacy cuts both ways. If the WNBA continues to ignore Clark's critique, continues to let its biggest star shoulder the burden of speaking truth while executives stay silent, then those 6 words will haunt them. They will stand as evidence of a league that had the chance to grow and chose to protect its comfort instead. In that version of history, Caitlyn Clark becomes not just a superstar, but a tragic symbol of wasted potential, an athlete who carried the league to new heights while the institution itself crumbled under the weight of its own refusal to adapt. For Caitlyn Clark personally, her legacy is already secured. She's not just a generational talent, she's a cultural force. Fans will remember her not only for her deep threes and dazzling assists, but also for her willingness to say what others were too afraid to say. She's shifted the expectations of what it means to be a star in the WNBA, no longer just a player, but a leader, a truth teller, a catalyst, and whether the league likes it or not, that will always be part of her story. So, what does it all mean? It means Caitlyn Clark may have done in 6 words what decades of press conferences, PR campaigns, and league initiatives couldn't. She made the WNBA's future impossible to ignore. Her legacy won't just be measured in points, assists, or championships. It will be measured in how much her voice changed the direction of women's basketball. And here's the final twist. Whether the league rises to meet that legacy or shrinks from it will define not just Caitlyn Clark's era, but the entire trajectory of the WNBA.